I would like to call this meeting to order. So we are officially called to order. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Ways and Means and Senate Committee on Finance, our joint subcommittee on public safety, transportation, and natural resources. Again, this is actually our first joint subcommittee meeting on this committee topic for public safety, natural resources, and transportation. In this subcommittee, we will hear from a variety of different agencies over the next several weeks. I'm actually going to read them this way I won't miss anyone. They include Department of Correction, Public Safety, Motor Vehicles, Conservation and Natural Resources, Transportation and Wildlife, as well as the Colorado River Commission, Peace Officer Standards and Training, and the Office of the Military and Department of Veteran Services. Senator Dennis and I will alternate chairing these meetings. So he will be chairing the next one that we have on Thursday. With that, Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Senator Brooks.
Here.
Senator Dennis.
Here.
Senator Ghg.
Here.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Assemblywoman Peter.
Here.
Okay. Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblywoman Titus. Assemblywoman Tolles.
Here.
Assemblyman Watts.
Here.
And Chair Miller.
Here.
Okay, I've got one absent. Assemblywoman Titus.
Okay, please mark Assemblywoman Titus present when she arrives.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd also like to welcome everyone that's viewing online, and I'm going to go over a few housekeeping issues before we begin. Committee members, again, please leave your cameras on during the course of the meeting and silence your phones and any other electronics. Please send me a chat if you have a question for the presenters when we're at that appropriate time. For members of the public, if you wish to make public comment, please pre-register online through the link that's provided in the agenda. Once you do that, you will be provided with a telephone number and a meeting ID so that we have accurate records of all of the participants. Please don't share that number, but please make sure that each individual registers themselves. For everyone testifying, please make sure to clearly state your first and last name before each time you speak. This just gives our committee secretary the ability to accurately record who's speaking for the minutes. Today, our presentations in the subcommittee, we will begin with working on the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. This will be presented to us from Director Bradley Crowell. We'll have 7 of the departments on the agenda today. And so Director Crowell, whenever you're ready, you may begin. I do have one question for you before we begin. Is it okay if we stop after each department or each budget so that for committee members who have questions?
Hold on, say that again.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Sorry, Chair, hopefully you can hear me now. That was our understanding and our plan as well, so that works very, very well for us.
Okay, perfect. And again, committee members, just please send me a chat when you'd like to ask a question. And with that, we are ready whenever you are.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Again,
Slideshow.
Again, for the record, my name is Brad Kroll. I'm the Director of the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. A number of our subdivisions and programs will be presenting to you today, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves as they come up to present. But as a quick overview, before I turn it over to the very first presenter today, Rebecca Palmer with the State Historic Preservation Office, I just wanted to give the committee members, particularly those who may be new or not as familiar with the department, a bit of how broad our jurisdiction and how big we are. These first few slides here,
I'm sorry, Director, I think you went back on mute. Director Kroll, I think you're back on mute. We can't hear you.
how about that? Better?
That's much better.
Sorry,
Is there any of it?
it inadvertent clicked. I think I went on mute when I went to this slide, so hopefully you heard me up until this point.
Actually, we did not. Can you repeat? You
Yes,
could start from the
Happy to.
beginning. That would be swell.
happy to.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just going to give a very brief, particularly now with a little bit of delay, very brief overview of the department before I hand it off to our first presenter today, Rebecca Palmer with our State Historic Preservation Office. But I wanted to give a little overview of the department for those who are not as familiar with it, with DCNR and just our breadth and scope of what we do. And you'll hear from a number of our divisions and programs today, and then later from others as well. In total, we have eight divisions and 3 programs and 16 boards and commissions.
Just right.
Right. You'll hear a subset of these today. The next few slides, I encourage folks to go over at their own time and leisure, but it gives a little bit of an overview of each of the divisions and programs within the department. In full, we're a little over 700 full-time employees and around 1,000 when you count seasonal employees. So we're a fairly big department, and just want folks to know the breadth and scope of what we do with all of our programs. Skipping quickly, just big picture. Here's our department total in the budget proposal for this year. That's the Biennium total is 292 million. General fund, though, please note, is just 77.5 million. The governor's proposal includes the addition of 6 positions, which we can talk about more. One of which will be included in today's discussion. So I just wanted folks to know that this is in the packet for review as needed, as well as this next slide, which breaks it down again, as I said, total funding versus general fund. So up a little bit overall for department funding and down a little bit in terms of total general fund. With that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca Palmer, and I'll join you again here shortly to go over the director's office budget as well. So, Rebecca.
Where is the presentation?
It's next. It's like,
It just goes next.
Good morning, Chair Miller and Chair Dennis and members of the subcommittees on public safety, natural resources, and transportation. My name is Rebecca Lynn Palmer, and I'm the administrator for the State Historic Preservation Office, a division of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. This slide shows our mission statement, and along with some photographs highlighting resources addressed by our many programs. I'd like to draw your attention to some of our major program areas. This is not a complete list, but it is some of the highlights I'd like to address. Just 3 of the program areas at this point. Review and compliance. The division conducts around 2,000 reviews of federal, state, and local government projects that receive federal assistance, funding, or permitting, from things like major infrastructure projects to federal assistance for agricultural producers from NRCS. Another one of our programs is the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Credit. This credit, while not being used much in this state, does have advantages for property owners with historic buildings. It's a 20% federal credit on qualifying expenses for the rehabilitation of eligible historic buildings for use such as restaurants, the Pink House in Genoa as an example, and low-income housing. Nevada has not used it for low-income housing, but many states do use this rehabilitation tax credit for, along with federal CDBG funding to develop low-income housing. And finally, one of our other programs important to the state is the We Are Staff, for the Commission for Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation. That commission has provided over $44 million of general obligation bond funds to rehabilitate 102 historic buildings as community centers. Successful projects have been everything from Oates Park School in Fallon and the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. I am presenting budget account 4205. These two pie charts illustrate the total revenue for the biennium in budget account 4205 by source. The federal funding share is in green, and the general fund appropriation is in blue on those pie charts. The reduction in the FTE will be addressed in the next slide. There's a reduction of 1 FTE proposed in the governor's recommended budget. This slide illustrates the enhancements in the governor's recommended budget. E800, this enhancement is in fiscal year 23. It matches the anticipated cost share after transferring the ASO 1 to the director's office. E900, this enhancement proposes to transfer the ASO 1 position to the director's office. The position will continue to provide the same fiscal services to the division, but this transfer will achieve two things: an increased level of financial efficiency and a centralized fiscal staff at the director's office level, which was not previously possible. Additional information concerning the centralization of fiscal services at the director's level will be discussed in the presentation on budget account 4150. The two other enhancements on this list are adjustments for annualized travel due to COVID. We have been unable to visit the historic properties and assist members of the public directly. So this will annualize that travel and operating expense. And of course, the last enhancement is E710, which is equipment replacement per our replacement schedule. I would be remiss if I did not mention that the division faces some significant challenges. There are two primary challenges in this upcoming biennium. The division is supported by federal funds from the National Park Service as an appropriation from the Historic Preservation Fund. The fund is replenished through offshore oil and gas leases. So it is not taxpayer dollars, but leases from offshore oil and gas. This upcoming fiscal year, Nevada is set to receive $874,000 in federal funds, but this federal funding requires a 40% match, which amounts in this upcoming fiscal year to approximately $583,000. The current appropriation, however, is between 30 and 35%. Insufficient match would result in two things: a reversion of federal funds and a reduction in our capacity to expeditiously review infrastructure projects. Hence my mentioning of the review and compliance program. So it's a possibility the infrastructure projects could be impacted by a reduction in the match percentage. The second challenge we face is an organizational structure that is out of date, inefficient, and not a cost-effective use of existing staff. The organizational structure dates to 1983, when there were 4 FTE and 9 program areas, 8 which were federally required and 1 that was legislatively required. There are now 14 employees in the division, and there are 17 programs. with the still 8 federal and the remainder being programs designed and inserted into our statute. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Administrator. I actually believe that we have questions from Assemblywoman or Vice Chair Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and forgive the delay. I have a new computer system set up on my desk and I'm learning how to manage it. And thank you for the presentation. I'm sure you covered part of this, but could you just please explain to us why the recommendation to support a vehicle lease with bond proceeds is an appropriate use of the funds, and clarify how this use is allowed under NRS 383.530?
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. I'd be happy to explain that. In statute, the division and the commission, because we're staffed to the commission, is allowed to use 5% of the bond proceeds for administrative costs. We are staffed to the commission. We act as their eyes and ears. We visit these important projects like the El Rancho in Wells and the Northern Nevada Railway Foundation. In order to visit those often remote locations, we need a vehicle to do that. It is anticipated that the vehicle will be used primarily for CCCHP site visits. So it's an appropriate use of the administrative funds to administer the grants awarded those bond funds.
Vice Chairman Moreno. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I just have one more question, Madam Chair. With the impacts that are anticipated to grant funds, activities, and/or bond projects, if the recommended amounts of the funds are utilized to replace the general funds, could you tell us what those impacts that you're anticipating might be?
Question.
If any.
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. To the Vice Chair, I'm not understanding the question.
So if there are any, what impacts are you anticipated to grant funded activities and/or bond projects if the recommended amounts of the funds are utilized to replace the general funds?
To the Vice Chair, this is Rebecca Palmer.
I think it's just a funding.
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. It is a funding replacement. So we don't anticipate there would be an impact to any of our programs by this action.
And just as a follow-up, so the grant funds that are being utilized to replace the general funds, are these grants that we've been getting as your organization has been getting for years? Is there any fear that we may not get those grants in the future and you'd have to come back at future dates for general funds to replace those grants? Or is this something you're secure that would continue to come in?
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. Those general obligation bonds have been sold for the last few years. We anticipate that they would continue to be sold. If that is not the case, we would replace the bond proceeds with federal funds so that the vehicle could still continue to be used for federally funded project area activities.
So I would like to add something for the record. This is Kelly Williams, Chief Fiscal Officer for the department. And in regards to the grant funds, those are federal grant funds from their historic preservation grant. That is the grant that funds the majority of their program. And it's what has created their program, keeps their program going. And so the only thing that they could possibly risk at this point by using these funds for this purpose is that when the general fund is lower, and becomes lower, at some point they're going to have a hard time meeting the match requirement for that grant. So we haven't gotten to that point yet, and we hope that we don't, but as the general fund dollars are reduced, we will get to that point where we can't match the federal funds.
Thank you so much for the answer. And Madam Chair, that's all that I have.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Our next question comes from Senator Ghg.
Hope I've got you. I hope I'm unmuted now. I'm struggling with it as well this morning. My question is the 800 plus $1,000 that comes in federal dollars. Do we need to anticipate that we're going to see a downturn in those dollars with the move by the Biden administration to the moratorium on drilling on public lands? Again, that's where these federal dollars are coming from. Do we anticipate a downturn there?
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer, and good morning, Senator Ghg. It's difficult to predict on a long-term basis, obviously as administrations change. However, I have not been informed through our national organization that there is an anticipated downturn in those federal funds. The federal government recognizes the value that they get by funding these state historic preservation offices. There are 50 similar offices across the nation with a pretty powerful lobby. The reason is because without the Historic Preservation Office, those federal undertakings under the Review and Compliance Program and under the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Program would be significantly impaired.
Yes, thank you. And I agree. But again, we do know there is at least a 60-day moratorium in place on drilling for oil on the public lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Our next question comes from Senator Brooks.
Thank you, Chair Miller. My question is just around the federal funds. Did you say that we are leaving some of those the allowable federal funds on the table by not having a sufficient match?
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer, and good morning, Senator Brooks. The answer to the question is yes.
And how much are we leaving on the table by not sufficiently matching?
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. We have left a very minor amount on the table in past years. However, it should be recognized that the current appropriation is between 30 and 35%, and 40% is what's required.
What does that mean in real dollars of federal funds not coming to Nevada?
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. In the last two federal fiscal years, we have reverted approximately $2,000. The reason it wasn't larger was because we were able to draw additional funds from our database subscription program to supplement, but that is not a long-term or sustainable solution.
And specifically in this budget?
Specifically in this budget, based on my initial calculations, and I've got them. Oh, for the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. I've got them here. We are probably looking for federal fiscal year, or excuse me, a state fiscal year 22 to be approximately $10,000 below the required match. For federal fiscal year 23, we're slightly above the required match.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. Our next question comes from Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair. And my questioning is kind of along the same lines. The match, does that doesn't have to be necessarily state dollars. Can that be like fee dollars that go towards that match?
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. The answer to the question is yes, it can.
And do you guys have the authority to set or raise those fees at the moment?
For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. The answer is yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and our last question from Assemblywoman Tolles. Oh, I'm sorry. That is, read that quickly. It's actually Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was fine to have Assemblywoman Tolles go forward first if she indeed did have a question, but I don't think she did so. But thank you, Madam Chair. Again, on the same line of questioning, we brought up in the past, this isn't new, that we are leaving federal dollars on the table. I just wanted to ask that question again for real dollars, and perhaps you could get that to us. I'm concerned about only coming up with a 30 to 35% match and costing us funds in the long run and trying to fill a deficit. And I'm wondering, what you mentioned that we had to revert back $2,000 in the past. If we accept this budget recommendation from the governor, will we actually have to not just leave funds on the table, but actually give back funds? That's my.
Okay. For the record, this is Rebecca Palmer. Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Titus. The answer to the question is yes, we would revert funds.
We're going to be giving back funds. And so, I just think that we need to be aware of that. This isn't the only budget we'll hear this in. So thank you for the answer to my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I don't see any more questions from members. So if you'd like to proceed to the next item.
Thank you, Chair Miller. This is Brad Kroll, Director of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, for the record. We'll now turn to the Director's Office budget as the next agenda item. So for our Director's Office, which is relatively small in terms of the size of our department, here you'll see the various executive budget accounts that the Director's Office manages, which include our administration, as well as our Conservation Districts Program, Sagebrush Ecosystem account, OHV, Outdoor Rec, Environmental Quality Improvement account. You'll hear from OHV and Outdoor Rec programs later in the session, I think in March, and you'll hear about conservation districts today. But it's notable that we manage all of these on a pretty limited staff within the Director's Office. I mentioned previously that we're comprised of 8 divisions in total. That's one more than the previous biennium, and that new addition is the Division of Outdoor Recreation. Currently, it's only staffed by one person. We do have authority in this budget proposal to hire the other 2 members that were approved when the division was created. So we do hope to be able to do that soon, to staff up that office because of its importance in many ways, including helping our economy, revive our economy with outdoor recreational opportunities that both Nevada residents and visitors can enjoy. The Director's Office has a number of objectives. Here are a few of our key objectives. A lot of words on the page here, but I'll just summarize quickly for you. First and foremost, we're integrating our efforts to address climate change across the department. This is new. This is a very worthwhile endeavor, but each of our divisions and programs has some nexus to addressing climate pollution or addressing the impacts of climate change in Nevada, and we are working to make sure we have an integrated fully leveraged efforts on climate within our existing staff. Now, do we have enough resources and staff to aggressively focus on climate? No. Are we doing everything we can with our current staff? Absolutely, and we'll continue to do so, and look forward to the conversation about how we can focus our efforts and leverage further going forward. One of our big agency objectives in the coming biennium is the addition of a human resource management oversight position. We're currently the largest executive branch agency without such a position. So this will help immensely. It will help Kelly Williams, who introduced herself earlier, our chief fiscal officer, as well as one of our deputy directors, not have to spend as much of their time doing personnel issues, which takes up a significant amount of time and takes away from other priorities. That position is proposed in the budget using non-general fund revenue. So just to note that. We also will be transferring an ASO position from within the department to the director's office to assist Kelly and her team further in managing all of our fiscal and budget account management, of which there is significant, as on the previous page showed, we have significant management of not just the director's office budget, but other programs as well. Lastly, we do hope that the proposal within the governor's budget to sell general obligation bonds for natural resource programs is approved. And if so, we hope to fully leverage those bond dollars throughout the state for the benefit of the local communities, building, either protecting sensitive areas or building new recreational opportunities, expanding parks, trails, etc. However, for our major bond program, AB 84, the conservation bond program, that was approved last biennium with a position to develop the regulations that are necessary to do the grant portion of that program. Right now, that position is proposed in the budget to be delayed to accrue the budget savings from it through early 2023. It'd be great if we could find the room to bring that position on sooner to make sure that we're fully prepared and able to maximize those bond dollars if they are approved and sold. Just a few of the challenges we have here within the department that we are managing, but are worth noting. All of the increased work we're doing on climate change, as I mentioned earlier, is significant, but we're integrating it in a cross-programmatic way. We have a couple of divisions and programs that are housed within the director's office, which is out of necessity, not by design. So for instance, our division of outdoor recreation, while it's just one person, we have the administrator located in the director's office. But ideally, as that division grows in the near term, we will be able to find their own space such that they can be, fully available to the public when that becomes appropriate. It's been enlightening, both a challenge and an enlightening process with COVID to know where our technology is sufficient and where it isn't for working in a remote fashion. I think I won't go through all the challenges because they're very similar to other agencies, but just so you know, we're having those issues as well in keeping up with some of the technology to operate in the modern environment. I'm now going to have Kelly Williams just go over a high level what our director's office budget looks like for the upcoming biennium as proposed in the governor's budget.
Good morning. For the record, Kelly Williams, Chief Fiscal Officer for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And in this first slide, this is specific to budget account 4150. With our total biennium amount requested in the GovRec budget is 3.9 million, just under 4 million. And only the general fund total for that is only right above 2 million. The rest of that is allocated into our director's office cost allocation, where our agencies that we oversee within the department pay into that cost allocation to help support our efforts. And then we have some other very small funding sources that most are agency transfers. At the bottom down under the agency FTE totals, you will see that we have current FTE totals of 12 and 12 FTEs. We have one additional FTE proposed for the 22-23 biennium, and I will talk about that in the next slide. So again, that first, their E900, that increase in that FTE for this biennium is the transfer of Administrative Services Officer 1 from the State Historic Preservation Office. Rebecca Plummer touched on that a little bit earlier. That will help us create efficiency within our director's office. For all of our smaller agencies within the department, we are trying to move towards a more consolidated fiscal model where we have greater oversight, efficiency, and rather than having a ASO or a fiscal person tied specifically to an agency, we want to hopefully bring them into the director's office so they can help manage certain aspects of multiple divisions within our department. That would include our off-highway vehicles program, the Division of Outdoor Recreation, and the other new programs that have been added to our department over the last few years. We do still have fiscal staff for the larger agencies within the department, like environmental protection, forestry, the ones that have a lot bigger programs, and those staff are funded specifically by those agencies and will remain within those agencies. The next decision unit E500 is just a change of the funding sources, that's the funding source that is associated with that transfer. What that does is it takes it out of its current funding source and instead brings it into the director's office cost allocation. The next one on the slide is not yet included in GovRec, but we did get to go ahead to talk about it. It is a new Personnel Officer 2 position that Mr. Kroll talked about earlier. That position will oversee the entire department's HR. It is a budget amendment that will be pending. It is a non-general fund budget amendment. We did secure grant funding to help support that position. So you will be seeing that come forward very soon. The next one is the delay. We're going to delay hiring. It's actually a reduction. The Conservation Bond Program Manager. That position was actually budgeted to start fiscal year 21, but because of the COVID delays, we have had to keep that position vacant, and we have not yet been able to hire that. So it is proposed to remain vacant through the end of calendar year 22, with hopefully reinstatement in January 23, if not earlier, if possible. The next reduction is specific to the contract authority for our Sagebrush ecosystem program. This was done through an M150 adjustment. So you're not going to see an actual decision unit specific to this, but it is a reduction in contract authority of $100,000 each year. That contract authority is currently only $185,000 each year, so that does reduce it down to $85,000 each year. Which the program does have plans for the full contract authority should it be available. So Jim Lawrence will talk about a little bit about what that contract authority does when he goes over a Sagebrush ecosystem program in just a little bit. And then the very last thing on that slide is, the supplemental appropriation for employee who's retiring, long-term employee within our director's office. And that's a fiscal year 21 appropriation.
Good morning, Chair Miller and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Jim Lawrence, one of the deputy directors here at Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. It's always a pleasure to present before this committee. I'll spend a few minutes talking over a couple of slides regarding our Sagebrush ecosystem program, and then I'll also talk about a slide regarding the Conservation Bond Program. Real briefly, the Sagebrush ecosystem program, I think many of you might recall that this was established in statute about 8 years ago. And really the impetus here is it is a multidisciplinary interagency effort regarding the sagebrush ecosystem, as well as protecting the species of the greater sage grouse, and then ideally to do such good work that we're avoiding the necessitating of a listing of the species as a threatened and endangered species. We have an interagency team of 5 individuals that are basically administering this program. We have a representative from the director's office coordinating it. There is an employee from the Division of Forestry, an employee from the Department of Wildlife, and also an employee from the Department of Agriculture. It is very successful in that we're able to coordinate back and forth regarding, the issues across divisions and departments related to the sagebrush ecosystem. The governor appointed council is about 15 individuals representing various sectors and stakeholders of the sagebrush ecosystem, including industry, wildlife, environmental, general public, energy, mining, etc. And they do really good work in coming to a consensus. We also have about 6 members that are ex officio, and these are the department heads of the various state agencies and federal agencies that have a stake in the sagebrush ecosystem, such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, from the state side, Nevada Department of Wildlife, Department of Agriculture. And really what it is, it's the forum where we can make decisions regarding the sagebrush ecosystem. The fiscal support of the program is found in 2 budget accounts. The operational aspect is in budget account 4150. And that's where we have the operations for the people that are doing the work and our contract dollars as well. There's also the account to restore the sagebrush ecosystem, and that's budget account 4156. It was a few sessions ago where this body appropriated $2 million for our program to give out as grants for folks to do sagebrush habitat improvement work and to generate credits for our mitigation program. It's been very successful. Once folks grow the credits, as we speak about it, if they transfer them to an entity for mitigation, the entity that got the grant from us is required to pay it back, and it goes back into the account. So it's replenished so we can do more habitat enhancement work out in the landscape. Right now we have a balance a little bit over $1 million. We have 14 projects basically encumbered with those dollars. So it is encumbered, and we're starting to see some money returned. And I think recently over the last fiscal year, we had about $200,000 returned back to that account. So it's been successful. A little bit of a program update. I think it's really important that even though this program has been up and running for about 8 years, we have built the mitigation program and the conservation credit system. We have the Greater Sage Grouse Protection Plan in place. But what has really sort of amped up our workload is in 2019, we adopted regulations that requires mitigation for certain disturbances out in the sagebrush ecosystem. And if those disturbances are on either state or federal land, they have to do the mitigation, and the mitigation has to be through our conservation credit system, which is basically a system of assigning credits for restoration activities, assigning debits to measure the impacts from disturbances. It's a scientific model. It's used consistently and transparently across the landscape, so there's no questions about how those numbers are arrived at. The important part of the program is the adaptive management and the best available science. In environmental work in particular, sometimes plans become stale where the landscape does not remain static. So we have a robust adaptive management system in place, and we are constantly working with the Department of Wildlife, USGS, the Bureau of Land Management, to make sure that our habitat maps are up to date and reflect the current landscape and the current science. We've also, with our contract dollars, developed conservation planning tools that accounts for population modeling of greater sage grouse so we can forecast impacts in different areas. We've also built into it through contract dollars a robust map of where the conifer encroachment, and conifer encroachment is a threat to the sagebrush ecosystem. So where we're having that, and we can move appropriately, as well as raven populations, which are also a threat to the greater sage grouse. We do have future needs, as Director Kroll indicated in his remarks. We are incorporating climate into everything we do. And for the sagebrush ecosystem, it's especially important because of the loss of habitat due to fire. So we really need to build our models so that we can incorporate fire recovery into our credit system, and so we can encourage and incentivize more fire rehabilitation out in the landscape. We also have a great need to better identify the specific impacts from wild horse and burrow populations, because that's an important component of the landscape, and it's a threat to the landscape as well. And then lastly, on the conservation credit system, I'll just give you a very brief update in that, you know, it took a little while for the program to generate some momentum. Through FY 2019, we have 10,500 credits that were generated from habitat restoration projects. Currently, there are over 17,000 credits available for transfer. So it is really, we're really exponentially growing the amount of restoration work happening out in the landscape. And because we incorporate indirect impacts, and I won't go into the details of that, but it means that we account for not just the physical disturbance, but also the impacts beyond the footprint. Our credits to date have generated almost 70,000 acres of habitat conservation. Right now, we have 21,500 additional credits to become available in fiscal year 21. And then as far as the debits, the disturbance side that we've mitigated, we mitigated about 2,700 debits through FY 2019 and 1,100 from FY 20 to the present. And if you look in parentheses, we're mitigating, you know, about 6,500 acres of direct impacts, and our mitigation is requiring 70,000 acres of habitat conservation. So that's how we're ensuring the net conservation gain as part of this program. Transactions have also increased. We had 2 transactions through FY19. Post FY19, with our regulations in place, we had 13 transactions. So the regulations are really moving the needle as far as getting the work done. And we anticipate 20 transactions through FY22. That's all I have on the Sagebrush ecosystem program. I can touch really quickly on conservation bonds. Assembly Bill 84, 2019.
Very quickly, please. Very quickly.
The authority for AB 84, 217.5 million. It was the last legislative session. As Director Cole said, we had approval for a program manager to develop the regulations, but that's been delayed till January 2023. What's important about that is that the legislation calls for mandatory regulations for the grant portion, and there's 8 categories for grants. There's also 7 direct allocations in the bill, and so that's what we'll be working with initially for the $20 million in general obligation bonds that's in the current governor's recommended budget. So we'll have to be focusing on those direct allocations until we get that program manager in place and until we can start working on the regulations, because we don't have an existing position dedicated to that. And with that, that's all I have on the bond program.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a number of members that have questions. So again, looking at where we are on the agenda right now, we still have many budgets to cover this morning. So I appreciate that members will ask their questions, that the questions will be concise, that they won't be repetitive. And presenters, I ask that you also respond in very concise, with very concise answers. The first question is from Senator Dennis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you may have already answered it, so you could just say yes or no, but the impact of holding that management analyst position, did I just hear you say that you're not going to be able to do that until you get the position? And since the position is being held, that means you're not going to be doing it right now?
Yes. Thank you, Senator Dennis. For the record, Jim Lawrence. The impact of holding back on that management analyst position for the bond program is that we cannot work on the necessary regulations for the grant portion. And there are a lot of stakeholders that are eligible for that grant portion for works along the Truckee and Carson Rivers, nonprofits for acquisitions. So absent the position, we can't work on the necessary regulations for that portion of the program. But Assembly Bill 84 also called for bond proceeds to go directly to certain recipients without having grant regulations in place. And those are entities like the Department of Wildlife, Division of State Parks, Springs Museum, and there's a few others, Las Vegas Valley Trail. So absent the position, we're only going to be able to focus on bond proceeds going to those direct call outs because they don't require the regulations. It will be a little less efficient because we're going to have to absorb those duties and and do all the stakeholder outreach, amongst everything else we're doing. And it'd be better to have the position in place so we can still move forward absent the position.
So you're saying though, you're able to move forward on the 145 million direct allocation, but you're not able to move forward on the 72.5 million?
Jim Lawrence, for the record, that is correct. But I also want to call it in the governor's budget, it's $20 million in the governor's recommended budget for AB 84. So for the upcoming biennium, that $20 million, absent the management analyst position, we will have to focus those dollars on what I'm calling those direct recipient categories.
Okay, and then at some point in the future, when you get that position, then you can move forward on that 72.5 million?
That's absolutely correct, Jim Lawrence, for the record. Then we get the position, we get the regulations in place, and then that gives us the authority to move forward with the grant portion of the program.
Okay, and you don't have any other resources that you could utilize to administer that?
Jim Lawrence, for the record, I wish we did. We're a small staff. We're stretched thin, and believe me, if we had somebody to dedicate to the regulatory administrative rulemaking, we would. We don't have the bandwidth. This program is what we're calling Question 1 Next Generation sometimes, and I was involved with the regulations for Question 1. And it took about 3 individuals to do the necessary stakeholder work, do the workshops, go across the state, because it's a very broad program. So it took, it took about 9 months to get that done. Certainly, since we've already done it for Question 1, we can streamline and do it with less than 3 people and maybe in less time, but it is still a very time-consuming endeavor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In our notes, it says that you have didn't contract with the Department of Wildlife in your budget, and I'm wondering why that it didn't happen and that you're going to contract with another vendor. Can you explain what happened there and what you're looking at to accomplish with the change?
Yes. Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. For the record, Jim Lawrence, Deputy Director, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. With our program, we always look for opportunities to leverage our dollars and maximize the best work we can do. So in the previous biennium, with our contract dollars, the Department of Wildlife already had a contract in place with the U.S. Geological Service, Dr. Pete Coates, and he's one of the most renowned greater sage-grouse experts. So we were able to take those contract dollars, amend the existing Department of Wildlife contract that they had with USGS so that we could take our dollars and then maximize it against other dollars for the maximum benefit. Department of Wildlife informed us that contract that they were doing with USGS has expired. They're not renewing it, so we don't have that opportunity to do it again. It wasn't necessarily a conscious choice by the program. It's just sort of the way things have played out. What we will do is probably contract again with USGS because they're the foremost experts, again, to get the work that we need done regarding fire recovery, wild horse and burrow populations, et cetera. So that's the story there with why the switch was done.
A follow-up quick question, Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
I'm sure Senator Ghg will be talking about the conservation credit system. He's up next, I'm sure. I'm wondering about the results. It's been 8 years since the governor developed these programs, and it's been 8 years since we recognized that we wanted to avoid putting our sage grouse on the endangered species list. It'd be nice to hear some success stories and know that we've actually been successful in doing this, and as opposed to hearing about wildfire habitat, et cetera. Have we had any success? Not just cutting down, the juniper and pinyon encroachment, but have we seen any success?
Yes. Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. Great question. Again, for the record, Jim Lawrence, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. We've got a great track record with the conservation credit system. Now, to set the context, the credit system is developed to incentivize landowner participation in habitat restoration to get credits that can then be sold to maybe a mining company or renewable energy project that's doing disturbance so that they can mitigate. It has been, to the point now where we have 28 projects for habitat restoration that are enrolled in the system. And as a result of those projects alone generate 42,765 credits. And what that means as far as managing the landscape, because it's really important to know that if the credits are transferred, there has to be a 30-year management plan in place to make sure that the habitat restoration stays in place. And the acres conserved as a result of these projects is almost 115,000 acres. Now, that is used to mitigate on the disturbance side. So if you take that 115,000 acres of conservation, the direct impact from the debit projects totals 15,600 acres. So,
Okay, but that doesn't answer my question. Do we see more sage grouse on the ground?
so that is a question that is not always the easiest to answer because population trends go up and down and they don't necessarily respond immediately to a habitat restoration project. While they do respond immediately when there's a disturbance. It's a question that's probably more appropriate of the Department of Wildlife. They have the specific numbers on the trend, trend data, as well as populations. They do a lot of forecast modeling. My understanding is that during the COVID times, they were not able to go out and do their population surveys. So we do not have the most recent numbers, but I will be very upfront and honest with you that as far as population numbers go, because of the wildfires that we've had over the last 2 or 3 years, there will be some declines in certain population areas.
And if I may, Assemblywoman Titus, Brad Kroll for the record, prior to COVID, our numbers, our sage grouse population numbers were stabilizing. We were either seeing the most minimal decrease or stable population numbers compared to other Western states. But other Western states are faring much more poorly than we are because they don't have a system in place to do this. So the sage grouse declines in other states have been significant, double digits in many cases. We're in the single digits here in Nevada or stable. So it's working. I just hope that those other states are able to be successful so that we don't get a listing that impacts us despite our success here in Nevada.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Next, Senator Ghg.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be as brief as I can. Yes, clearly, we know there's a lot habitat improvement really occurring in vast areas across this state. We'll talk some more about the Sage Grouse Conservation Credit Program as we move forward, I'm sure. I guess my real concern with this, by holding the management analyst position vacant, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that doesn't allow us to get the conservation grants out. And those grants are, in fact, recoverable as we move them forward. This is a huge piece of this we're missing with the question 2 money is, hey, if we get these out on the ground, and in the end, we grant this money, then it can, in fact, be returned and back to the process. I think we're being, penny wise and pound foolish. I'm sorry. With that, not really a question, just to speak. Thank you.
Thank
If I'm wrong, Mr. Law.
Thank you, Senator. And so with that being a comment, we'll move on to Vice Chair Monroe Moreno has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you were going through your presentation on the slide that had budget account 4150, the director's office, there was a position that you had noted on that slide for a new personnel officer 2. But as I was looking through my notes of the information your office relayed to our fiscal staff, I do not see that position listed in my notes anywhere. Could you tell us a little bit more about that position? It says pending and a budget amendment pending. Can you let us know exactly what that position would be doing? When can we anticipate receiving that amendment?
Sure. For the record, Kelly Williams, Chief Fiscal Officer for the department. And that position is a personnel officer 2, which is meant to be a manager level position that usually sits within a director's office of departments. The level of that position is set by the size of the department. So personnel has determined that a personnel officer 2 is appropriate for our department. We do not currently have one. We don't have someone to manage the many personnel issues that come up from a department of our size. And that position, you're right, was not included in GovRec. That was, we were able to secure grant funding for that. And so we are working with GFO to move that through the budget amendment process. We wanted to talk about it today so that you were aware as you see it move forward. The budget amendment process, to my knowledge, we just got a memo, I think yesterday, from the governor's finance office that they have opened up that module in NEBS, and we will start processing those budget amendments through that module. And your staff should be seeing that budget amendment very soon. It is one that GFO has said they will be moving forward on our behalf. And it is 100% non-general fund.
Thank you for that. And there isn't a listed amount for FY22, FY23. What is the anticipated amount for that position? Although it is grant funded, I'd still like to know what that amount is.
Sure, thank you. For the record, Kelly Williams. So I'm not going to give you an exact number, but it is right about $100,000 each year of the biennium. And that does include the position itself and some operating that goes with it. And as we move through the budget amendment process, we can definitely provide a more exact number for your review. And that will be included in the budget amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Then my last question on that, as you look for the person to fill that position, will you be looking statewide to fill that, or just someone here in the north that could easily fit into the director's office?
Yeah, so thank you again. For the record, Kelly Williams. So we actually, we do go through the personnel, a thing. We do look statewide to find the best candidate for that position.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
For the record, we generally try to cast the widest net possible to find the best talent possible, regardless of location.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions from any other members. So we can move on to the next item. I will ask that as you're presenting, I just want to remind you that members actually, we have all, access to the presentations and other resources as well. So if you could give us a very high level overview of what the presentation is, because as you can see, our members have many things that they really want to get to. So if we could keep the presentation very concise as well, that will allow more time for questions because we still have many budgets to get through.
Share screen.
It's the one on the right, or the left side. Right there. Yeah. And then do share over at the side. And then skip through all those slides.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the committee. My name is Dominique Etchegoyen. I am a Deputy Director with the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. I'm here today to present on budget account 4151. The Nevada Conservation District's program, and can you make sure I'm not muted?
You are.
The Nevada Conservation District's program supports locally led efforts producing conservation outcomes throughout the state to ensure Nevada's sustainable and economic vitality. The Nevada Conservation District's program is housed within the Director's Office of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. The program provides staff and support to the State Conservation Commission. The program administers grants, and it provides technical and program assistance to Nevada's 28 locally elected conservation districts, which implement conservation and natural resource projects on the ground across Nevada. Those who are closely involved with the Nevada Conservation Districts often affectionately refer to them as Nevada's best kept secret. And while true, that's something that must change. We need to document and promote conservation district successes, develop and maintain effective statewide partnerships, and build capacity, particularly in Southern Nevada. We also need to improve the delivery of conservation by maximizing funding for collaborative conservation projects and redesigning the grant program to ensure statewide applicability and opportunity. These increased capacities will enable the program to address statewide challenges and develop and implement climate change strategies, as well as work in cooperation with our federal, state, and local partners to address issues on a watershed and a landscape scale. The program will also continue its coordination and support for the State Conservation Commission, which is a group of 9 appointed members that provide leadership and carry out policies on renewable natural resource conservation issues within and across Nevada. Budget account 4151 requires $967,207 from the general fund. This budget account includes operating costs, the salaries for 4 full-time employees, and in-state travel and funding to support the Conservation District's 3 conservation staff specialists operating out of rural parts of Nevada, including Elko, Ely, and Winnemucca. These decision units are the tough decisions we made to help the state meet its necessary budget reductions. These were thoughtful, strategic, and necessary decisions that prevent us as a program and as a department from permanently eliminating any positions, yet allow us to continue to meet our collective mission. The first half of E680 is the reduction of the annual competitive grant by $50,000 per year, resulting in a $100,000 budget reduction over the biennium. The second half of E680 is the reduction of the Conservation District's annual stipend by $1,000 for each of Nevada's 28 conservation districts, resulting in a $56,000 budget reduction over the biennium. Finally, our program manager, or Management Analyst 3, recently accepted a promotion outside of state service. E681 accounts for the vacancy savings by temporarily delaying the hire of this position through November of 2022, resulting in an $82,120 reduction over the course of the biennium. Fortunately, we have very smart, capable, hardworking staff who are willing to step up. We have requested a 5% temporary salary increase from the Division of Human Resource Management for one of our staff resource specialists to assume these duties and responsibilities until we are able to hire this program manager position. With Nevada being 110,567 square miles, you can imagine that this is a large state for only 4 conservation district staff to cover and effectively develop local partnerships and meet the needs of landowners and land users across all of Nevada. As previously mentioned, one of the program's primary goals is to build capacity in Southern Nevada. For now, a resource staff specialist from Ely will continue to stretch to provide that support to Southern Nevada. Limited state funding also restricts the capitalization of federal match funding, thereby inhibiting the program's ability to maximize collaborative conservation opportunities. And as you can imagine, COVID has only exacerbated these challenges. The success of our conservation districts rests upon relationships, trust, in-person communication, and on-the-ground projects, and that's been challenging over the course of the last year. So these are the challenges that we face today, but hope to overcome tomorrow. Although the Nevada Conservation District's program is small, it's vitally important to our rural communities, and it has a lasting positive impact on our natural resources. That completes my presentation, and I would be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe our first question is coming from Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more in depth about the anticipated impacts of the proposed reduction for the grant program, and specifically, you just mentioned the ability to leverage federal funds. So if you could speak to that, as well as with the last budget we just heard, the impacts for sage grouse and habitat, and especially kind of how that fits into the overall conversation on listing and protection of that species. So if you could just give a little bit more insight into how these reductions are going to have an impact on the state.
Thank you for the question. Dominic Etchegoyen, Deputy Director. Undoubtedly, there's no way around it. These reductions are going to have an impact on our ability to put those projects on the ground and to match with other potential federal grant opportunities. That said, by maintaining our resource staff, we are able to continue to work with the 28 individual conservation districts to ensure that they continue to meet their daily mission and implement projects. So it doesn't It doesn't halt or stop all conservation work, but it does inhibit it. And it will have an impact, but our hope is that our economy recovers, and in the future, we're able to fund these grants, and we're able to go out and get the match funding that is available to ensure this additional work. And just for your knowledge and information, often the conservation districts in Nevada say that they get a 300% return on the investment that we make with them. Remember, we have those annual stipends that we provide them, and they are still able to go out and use those stipends to create match funding and continue to take advantage of grant opportunities that exist.
Thank you for that. And I might circle back to that in just a second, but since you brought up the conservation districts and the support for them, can you discuss the impacts that the conservation districts will see as a result in the reduction of funding that they're going to see in terms of grants, as well as the impact of holding that position from hiring? Is there any projected impact in their ability to meet their statutory requirements or carry out programs?
Thank you. That stipend will have an impact on them. Again, we provide $5,000 most recently to them on an annual basis. This will be reducing it by $1,000, so we're only providing them $4,000 annually. Conservation districts use those dollars for different things. Some of them use it for operating costs, administrative costs, insurance. So we'll have an impact, undoubtedly. In terms of the program manager, yes, leaving that position will make it harder for us to support them. That leaves only 3 of our permanent staff within the conservation districts to continue to support those individual districts. We are very fortunate, however, we have a previous program manager who has offered to volunteer his time to assist part-time to bring our other staff up to speed and to communicate with the conservation districts and continue to provide the support they need so that we are able to assist them in meeting all of their statutory and regulatory requirements.
Thank you for that. That is very generous for a state employee to offer their time on a volunteer basis to assist our state during this time. Can you discuss, are there any alternative funding sources available to conservation districts given the cuts that we're seeing here? Additional grants? Are there any fees that could, schedules that could be modified to support the work that the conservation districts are undertaking?
Thank you for the question. Dominic Ghg, Deputy Director. I would say that our conservation districts always struggle to find alternate funding sources. They always have more work than they have dollars. So that's always an issue that we face. It's exacerbated more under the current circumstances. I am not aware of anything that we can readily take advantage of in terms of fees or otherwise that would help assist this program, but it's something that we will look at. And if we find something that we are able to take advantage of, I'll report back to you and let you know.
Thank you for that. And one last question that I have is, do you have any estimate between the reduction in the grants to the conservation districts and the reduction to the competitive grant program, how much federal money we might be leaving on the table over the next biennium?
I would only be speculating, but often when I look at those matching opportunities, often we're looking at a 50% match. So I'd say that we're possibly leaving on the table about as much as we are not funding through that grant program.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ghg, for your responses, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence.
Sure, you're welcome. And so again, I would just like to clarify that back to Assemblyman Watt's question about holding that management analyst position empty, that the response is that someone that's already in the department will be serving that program management role with only a 5% basically increase or bonus for doing basically 2 positions. As employees, we all have been in that position where we've been expected to do the job of 2 people. And then we're also relying on a volunteer who, again, volunteers may at any time find it very exhaustive and we can't guarantee a volunteer relationship. So my question, and it's, I'm asking for a brief response, is do you feel that this will have an impact on the agency? Because I also don't appreciate when employees get in the position when, if and when the funds are available to hire that program manager, will that person who's stepping up, will they be the one being the program manager, or will they be the one training their new boss? And so I'm just wondering, do you believe that that holding this position will have an impact on the department, on the program?
Thank you for the question. Dominique Etchegoyen for the record. Undoubtedly, there will be an impact on the program, but we are trying to minimize that. And you're correct. The individual stepping up is, we're proposing, and we've requested a 5% temporary salary increase. That individual would not have the capacity to take on both of these positions. That individual would assume the most important job duties that were held by the program manager. Those include supervisory duties of the other resource staff specialists in the program. And unfortunately, some of the former duties will be spread out amongst the other employees and the volunteer. But something else to account for this is we're going to be providing a lot of support through the director's office. As the deputy director that oversees this particular program, I envision that I personally will have to devote time as well to help pick up the slack here. And so we're all going to be working together, but undoubtedly there is going to be an impact on this program. It's going to stretch our resources thin within our department, but we're used to this. We always do all we can and we pull together. And I think this is manageable as long as it's temporary and as long as we're able after this period of time to rehire that program manager. And the individual who is stepping up is perfectly qualified for this program manager position. We think a lot of her. She has shown great capability in her work and she would be eligible. We could not promise her that position. We'd go through the hiring process, but I would not be at all surprised if she were the candidate we selected in the future.
Okay, and thank you for that. Again, I know we're talking about budgets, but we need to make sure that every conversation we have that comes out of this building is person-centric. And so I appreciate that, and I appreciate your efforts and what you individually will be stepping up to do. And so with that, we will move on to the next presentation. Please, again, please keep it concise because you see we have many, many questions that we would like to get to.
Madam Chair, this is Senator Ghg. Could I make a quick comment on the budget, please?
Extremely quick, please.
Yes, it will be. Mr. Etchegoyen, I think it's only fair to state, and we all know, I know in your own presentation, every dollar that comes through the conservation programs returns at least 300% return or 3-to-1. But in many cases, we see as high as, a $20 return for every dollar invested. Would you agree?
Absolutely, Senator Ghg. Dominique Etchegoyen for the record. That is absolutely correct. This is an incredibly beneficial program in terms of those returns on investment.
Thank you for the indulgence, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Etchegoyen.
Thank you. And so for our next item.
Thank you, Chair Miller. This is Greg Lovato. I am the administrator of the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection. With me are Deputy Administrators Jennifer Carr and Jeff Kinder, as well as our Office of Financial Assistance Manager, Jason Cooper. As requested, today I will cover 4 of our budgets, namely our air, corrective action, sustainable materials, state revolving fund, and industrial site cleanup programs. While NDEP's day-to-day job is as a regulatory pollution control agency, we embrace our larger mission of preserving and enhancing Nevada's environment to protect public health, sustain health ecosystems, and contribute to a vibrant economy. NDEP has 11 bureaus to perform all the functions listed here. We coordinate with tribal environmental programs throughout the state, together with our tribal environmental liaison, Cliff Benuelos from the Intertribal Council of Nevada. Most of these programs, including air, safe drinking water, and water pollution control, as well as waste management, are performed under delegation agreements with US EPA, and a few, such as our chemical accident prevention and mining regulation reclamation programs, are performed under state-only authority. A quick breakdown of our division revenue sources is shown here. Our budget is primarily reliant on fees and then federal grants, followed by reimbursable agreements and environmental cleanup sites. Our main office is here in Carson City with an office of 30 people in Las Vegas. EPA grants, shown here in orange, have been flat to declining in most programs over the past several years. Our operating budget is primarily for personnel and contracts, including interlocal agreements with some county health district environmental programs. Since NDEP is a non-general fund agency, we also maintain reserves in our programs at an amount necessary to be able to adjust fees or expenditures through modifying regulation and work programs as needed. Moving on to our air program budget 3185. This budget covers both our air pollution control as well as our air quality planning programs, including our greenhouse gas emissions inventory and regulatory initiatives, such as the clean car regulations we are currently evaluating. This air program is funded by fees and federal grants. At the 2019 session, the Joint Budget Committee noted that the air program had a declining reserve and requested periodic updates on NDEP's efforts to stabilize this budget. NDEP submitted its final report to the legislature in May 2020, explaining we had completed a process of reviewing our air permitting fee structure and developed new fee regulations that received approval in 2019 from the State Environmental Commission and Legislative Commission. We are projecting that the air budget is on a sustainable path of increasing reserves and that it will reach its reserve targets at the end of state fiscal year 2027. In terms of notable enhancements, NDEP is recommending an additional environmental scientist position to help improve NDEP's annual greenhouse gas or GHG inventory, here as E250. This is associated with a proposed budget bill draft request approved by GFO, but as of late yesterday is awaiting final transmittal and introduction as a bill. I'll provide some more background here. The air program has prepared the Nevada GHG inventory since 2008. Before 2019, the 4-year report was mostly based on the EPA state inventory tool. With the sustained push for climate action by SB 254 in the 2019 session, as well as Governor Sisolak's Executive Order 2019-22, more accurate and up-to-date estimates and projections for specific sectors that make Nevada different from other states or US regions are needed, including use of ozone-depleting substance substitutes or hydrofluorocarbons. This state-only data will require additional resources to assemble the information available from other state agencies. In addition, as the Nevada climate strategy develops and policies are proposed to achieve the state GHG reduction goals, additional work will be required to evaluate the impact of these policies on future GHG projections for the state. Without this position, the air program will be limited to rely mostly on work done by the EPA state inventory tool, which frequently uses nationwide averages apportioned by population or other factors to roughly estimate state level emissions. In the associated bill draft request, NDEP is proposing to utilize a portion of the funding from the State Petroleum Fund that currently goes to the State Highway Fund to fund this new position. E255 supports travel and training. The large majority of travel by the air program is done to inspect regulated facilities and to maintain air quality monitoring equipment. Since March of 2020, travel has been reduced except for complaints and air monitoring equipment maintenance since that time. Reinstating the full budget for travel is necessary to verify compliance with federal and state air quality regulations. Similarly, training was reduced, but it is required for our staff to stay up to date on knowledge and skills required to properly perform their job. Most training is conducted off-site with specialized staff and specialized instructors. Lastly, E712, we include enhancements for the state air monitoring network to replace instrumentation currently used at existing monitoring stations. And under E720, we have new equipment to modernize some of our fine particulate air monitors. This new equipment is all funded by a grant that EPA provides annually. I'll pause there for any questions on budget 3185.
Okay, great. I think our first question comes from Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Sure, please.
Can you just go into some additional detail on what current staff resources are contributing to the statewide greenhouse gas report requirements? That's my first question.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters. This is Greg Lovato for the record. We currently have a couple of staff who spend part of their time on the Ghg Inventory more towards like the latter part of the year. And as I mentioned, they're currently just using available data that's right now through the EPA state inventory tool that's aggregated at the federal level. And then they supplement that with information from filings that utilities file with the Public Utilities Commission. But that's fairly, like I said, limited and part-time work in order to do this annually and make it more Nevada specific, and also gather even more data through the information that we put in the bill draft request. We'll need additional resources.
I can appreciate that. I know how hard end of year grant work is, and especially those EPA reportings. My second question is, can you discuss how the fund for cleaning up discharge of petroleum was determined to be appropriate to support costs associated with the greenhouse gas emissions reporting requirements?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters. Greg Lovato for the record. So as we looked at potential funding sources within the AIR program, we noted that our existing sources are permitting fees for stationary sources, as well as federal grants. We don't currently have the ability, although that may change, to fund greenhouse gas efforts through federal grants. And then permitting fees are generally intended to support air pollution control permitting and inspection and compliance for stationary sources. One of the reasons we looked to the petroleum fund is we noted that at the end of each year, the statutes require that any fees collected above $7.5 million, any balance above that at the end of each fiscal year is transferred to the State Highway Fund. That transfer to the State Highway Fund ranges starting at $2 million and above over the past 5 years. And noting that the transportation sector has become the greatest greenhouse gas emissions sector, we thought that this might be an appropriate use, limited use of a petroleum fund instead of transferring to the State Highway Fund. And that's how we identified that source. We realized that there's still probably another hearing coming on the bill draft request where I could, explain it a little more fully, but hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, that definitely clarifies. And just as a follow-up, Chair, if I may, thank you. Have you identified any alternative funding sources for this, or are you really, really banking on that statute change to be able to fund this position?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters. Greg Lovato for the record. This time, we haven't identified alternative funding sources. I think as the state's climate strategy evolves, other potential funding sources may arise with the change in administration. We may need to be flexible to be able to take advantage of any federal dollars that become available. But at this time, we have not identified other funding sources. I could probably look at those as we bring that bill forward and explain those more fully to see what other options might be out there.
Thank you for your responses. Yes, I'm additionally looking forward to seeing what EPA invests in our air programs again with this new administration. So I will keep an eye on that. Thanks.
Assemblywoman Tolles.
Thank you, Chair Miller. So I actually have a couple of follow-up questions to Assemblywoman Peters and Anchor for asking some of my initial questions. But just to clarify, if I heard you correctly, we're still planning on transferring $2 million a year each year in this biennium from the highway fund, but we're pursuing additional funding out of the petroleum fund. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, thanks, Assemblywoman Tolles. This is Greg Lovato for the record. So the way that the transfer from the petroleum fund works each year is a fee's collected on all refined fuel imported or refined in the state. It's 0.75 cents per gallon. And all of those funds, I think it accrues about between 10 and 14 million a year within that budget account. And then any funds that aren't spent on petroleum fund cleanups, the amount over 7.5 million is actually transferred to the state highway fund at the end of each year. And so what our bill proposal is that a portion of that to pay for this enhancement will be able to fund that position. So, roughly the cost of environmental scientist 3 position is what's shown in the decision unit.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I misunderstood that process, so appreciate that. So, and then my other question, just to clarify because I did wonder, of course, we had a very robust greenhouse gas emission report, and there was a lot of work that was done over the interim. And so I was curious about how much staff was able to do it already and demonstrated their capability. And then, now we're asking for a new position. And what I heard you say is that we have been relying on an EPA tool that uses more national averages, and the justification for having this new position is that it would be more specific statewide data. And that begs the question, does that mean that some of the information in that interim greenhouse gas report wasn't quite state specific accurate because we were using national averages instead?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Tolles, for the question. Greg Lovato for the record. So I think in terms of being able to prioritize areas for action, the inventory has served its purpose. We were able to estimate that the transportation sector, and when I say national averages, those are normally apportioned to states based on state-specific issues such as population or population growth or land area. So it's not like there isn't some adjustment for the fact that it's Nevada. In terms of identifying priorities, the Ghg inventory is pretty valuable actually. But as we look forward to assess the impact of specific policies, we need a lot more specific information for Nevada and a lot more up-to-date information for Nevada. And that's the gap we're trying to fill by adding these additional resources. And I'll pause there and see if our Air Programs Deputy Administrator, Jeff Kinder, if you want to add anything to that, Jeff?
Sure, thank you, Greg. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator with NDEP. As Greg said, all that data is collected in the state. It's sent up to the federal government through a couple different agencies and ultimately ends up at EPA where it's reapportioned by state-specific factors coming back to the state. That's the state inventory tool. But if we can collect that data here at the state level, we'll be able to produce the projections much quicker, as well as refine certain sectors of the GHG inventory. There's quite a bit of lag. I believe it's 3 years right now, where we have data and then we project forward. If we can collect that data here at the state level, we'll be able to close that gap and have much more real-time data in our GHG inventory.
Thank you. I really appreciate that discussion, because if we are looking at policies, it sounds like we need some more specific data before we jump the gun too quickly on specific policies. Priorities are good and having the right direction moving forward, but we need to be careful we're basing it on state-specific data.
And thank you, Assemblywoman. Seeing no other questions, I believe we are ready for our next budget.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Greg Lovato for the record. Budget account 3187 funds 3 NDEP bureaus, including corrective actions, sustainable materials management, and federal facilities. The program is funded by federal grants, petroleum fund fees, and disposal fees and agreements related to the U.S. Ecology hazardous waste landfill located near Beatty. Under E250, we are proposing to add an administrative assistant to support electronic management of records for our Bureau of Corrective Actions. That program has over 11,000 individual files that must be organized, digitized, and maintained going forward in an electronic format. This will save the public time, as this Bureau receives the most information requests for file review in the entire department as a part of property transfers and other environmental due diligence activities that environmental professionals take on behalf of lenders and property owners. Later on, I'll relate to E723 that also supports new electronic records management for that program. E252 and E260 support the continuing investigation and cleanup of the Anaconda copper mine site in Lyon County. This includes the 7.8% state cost share for the first phase of cleanup that started in 2019 and is anticipated to be completed in calendar year 2023, and also budget authority for technical oversight contracts for the Division, the Arrington Paiute, and Walker River Paiute tribes that are reimbursed by the Atlantic Richfield Company. E258 and E259 enhancements support NDEP lead cleanups at dry cleaner sites which have had historical releases to soil and groundwater, but no viable responsible party, and also include budget authority to address releases of hazardous substances from spills or other events on a contingency basis. E725 will support equipment needed for electronic records management for our waste programs. And as I mentioned earlier, E723 is electronic records management and database equipment for our corrective actions program. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions on budget account 3187.
Excellent. I believe our first question is coming from Assemblywoman Tolles.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So when does the agency anticipate that the new file management procedure would be implemented if the new administrative assistant position is approved?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Tolles. I'll start, Greg Lovato for the record, I'll start answering that question and then refer it over to Deputy Administrator Jennifer Carr. So we already do have some records in electronic form, but we're converting over to a new system that will have more longevity in the long term. So we actually are managing quite a bit of electronic records now. The assistant, I believe, normally they were able to hire those in October generally as a part of a new fiscal year. But I'll ask if Jennifer, if you want to add anything about the records management system in general.
Thank you, Greg. Jennifer Carr for the record. We've been implementing an electronic records management system for a number of years now. We've had early implementing bureaus that have been very successful, particularly our mining bureau now has a tremendous amount of records on site now, on our website now, where that has saved a tremendous amount of time and effort with records requests and the accessibility of our records to the public in a very simple manner through the web. So, other bureaus within the agency are coming on board with electronic records management as time and resources allow. And so this will, as Greg mentioned, really speed up the process for Bureau of Corrective Actions to get a tremendous amount of their records that are of extreme interest to the public on the web where they can be accessed readily. But the rest of the agency is working in that direction, but it's a decades-long effort.
Thank you. And just one follow-up question, if I may. What is your agency's policy on retaining the case files and the timeline of how long you hold on to closed case files?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Tolles. This is Greg Lovato for the record. So each of our programs has a records retention schedule. One unique thing about the Bureau of Corrective Actions is we're required to hold on to records that may become part of litigation indefinitely. And then we also see just the demand for records from that bureau for, like I said, property transfers or loans. So we actually don't have a records retention schedule for a lot of those contaminated sites. And we maintain those records indefinitely at this time.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. With that, I think we can move on to our next budget, which is about the Anaconda copper mines. There's already many people requesting questions on this. So if we could have a brief overview, because I know many people have questions on this.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I didn't have a separate presentation prepared for Anaconda Copper Mine. I can provide just a brief status update, if that would make sense.
Well, if you didn't have a separate one, why don't we go ahead and begin with the questions if that works for you, because it may naturally, your update may naturally come out from the questions that people have. So we will begin with Senator Brooks.
Thank you, Chair Miller. And yeah, just along the lines of what Chair Miller was just saying, just kind of wanted to understand what the recent cleanup efforts have been and what will be completed on those cleanup efforts on the mine site. Biennium.
Thank you, Senator Brooks. Greg Lovato for the record. So the Anaconda Copper Mine site is approximately 3,600 acres, the former mine site property. But the area that we've been investigating extends well north of the site due to offsite contamination of groundwater. And so we've actually divided the overall cleanup into 3 separate phases under an agreement with EPA that we entered into in February 2018. We lined out some target dates for basically completion of engineering and feasibility studies and decisions, as well as construction completion. And so of those 3 phases, the first phase of the cleanup is associated with the former Arametco heap leach pads. This is about 200 acres associated with those operations. And we've completed selection of the remedy in 2017 with EPA. We started construction on that final remedy in 2019, and we expect to be complete with that in 2023. In the second phase of cleanup, you're looking at the northern areas of the site as well as groundwater. We are nearing completion of within, I believe it's 2022 is when we expect to complete human health risk assessment for groundwater. And also we'll be moving towards selection of a remedy in calendar year 2024. And then the following southern areas of the site, such as the pit lake, would be selected for remedy by 2025. And then we have a few years there for remedy construction on those areas of the site that's scheduled by 2027. And so I think those are the dates we have. I don't remember them exactly off the top of my head, but I can provide more backup information as needed.
Thank you. Can I follow up, Chair?
Yes.
So do we know what the final state cost share amount is going to be?
Thank you, Senator Brooks. So the current estimates in the estimate from EPA and NDEP that were completed in 2017 are the state cost share portion I was telling you about, that phase 1, is 7.8% of $30 to $50 million, right? And so I think that equates to somewhere between $2 and $4 million would be the state cost share. The actual bid for the final phase of construction in phase 1, and all that is being negotiated by Atlantic Richfield. And, we understand that phase of construction is going to begin by June of this year. So once that contract is signed, we'll have a better idea of what that final cost share amount looks like. Those numbers I gave you earlier were the estimates that we had with the information we had available at the time. However, that had to make certain assumptions about, how the work would be done, how equipment would mobilize, and that would be actually if EPA were performing the work as opposed to a private party. And so the estimates may change from, what I told you earlier about, that 2 to 4 million.
Thank you. And what kind of community stakeholder engagement and education and communication has been going on around this cleanup?
Thank you, Senator Brooks. Greg Lovato for the record. So we've had several community meetings over the past couple of years since the deferral agreement with EPA was reached. Those were obviously not continued in person since last March, but we have had a number of interactions with the community, centering around sort of major milestones. The one most recently last year was the completion of the groundwater investigation. And we had in place at that time a bottled water program that had been operating since 2004. And that was for homes and others on wells that weren't served by city water and that whose water may be approaching or not meet drinking water standards. And that was at a time back in 2004 when we didn't know where the extent of contamination from the mine site was. Since all the work to define the extent of contamination was completed and the report was approved in 2020, we conducted a lot of outreach to homeowners and residents, and we've worked with the Arrington Paiute tribe to communicate the phase out of bottled water. So we had a lot of interaction with those entities, as well as the city of Arrington and Lyon County to explain what we were doing. We were actually able to offer in-house treatment systems to those that were phasing off of bottled water, even those who were outside the mine impacted groundwater area. And we were able to complete a lot of that work in the last part of last year, retest that water, that drinking water inside those homes, and it met all standards. So, going forward, we try to, group our outreach around, topics that might be of interest. It kind of waxes and wanes with, what's happening at the site. We do plan to do some outreach around the second phase of mobilization by June and explain what the construction progress is going to look like. There are efforts underway as a part of Atlantic Richfield entering into that contract to look for local labor and also labor from tribes, as well as engage efforts with EPA to provide job training. And so there's going to be some outreach occurring around that as well in this coming year.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Dennis?
I'm good. I think my stuff was answered. Thank you.
Okay, great. Assemblywoman Titus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As many of you know, literally Anaconda copper site mine is in my front yard. My 2 posts in my front fence is built from rocks from Anaconda, so I have a lot of azurite and malachite there from that mine. I need to go back to your statement regarding the offsite contamination of groundwater. And to my knowledge, all of those wells that were drawn, there's no documentation that there's direct contamination from that mine in any domestic well. I just want to make sure that's clarified.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. Greg Lovato for the record. So I'd probably be able to answer that question together with some maps and things like that, to sit down and kind of walk through, what the extent of contamination was determined to be, and then how that relates to, different wells. Different wells in different areas are screened at different depths. And so, it's not a 2-dimensional issue. It's more of a 3-dimensional issue. So you kind of have to go through and walk through that and figure that out.
Just so you know, sir, I have looked at all, as you know, I'm the county health officer for Lyon County, so I've been intimately involved in all those testing and all those wells and understand what the folks have done. I just wanted to make sure the record was clear that there's been, yes, we have certain chemicals in the water in those areas, but you haven't been able to link necessarily directly from the mining. We know that the agriculture departments in those fields there have worked very hard to make sure. I just don't want the impression that the groundwater is contaminated there when they work very hard to maintain the ag program in that valley. And I understand the water treatment process and with the tribal members there and the domestic wells and the concern that, but the very fact that you're now removing the bottled water and testing and making sure their wells in their homes are good. I just want to make sure that the citizens who may be following understand that the drinking water is safe and where they're living is safe. So I just didn't want any misunderstanding to go out there regarding contamination. So thank you, Madam Chair.
If I could add, Assemblywoman Titus, just to my previous answer. So there are currently no exposures of contaminated groundwater from the mine occurring at the site. That is correct.
Perfect, thank you.
I can't say that no exposures ever occurred going back in time since the mine operated, generally from the 50s to the 70s. And there may have been some wells offsite that may have received contaminated water from the mine. Right now, all the wells that could have received contamination from the mine are either hooked up to city water or are outside the area impacted by the mine. So it's maybe a slight clarification to your statements, and I'd be happy to provide more backup information as needed.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Assemblyman Watts?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. While we're on the topic of clarifications, I have a couple and I'll try and keep them very brief. To Assemblywoman Titus's question, so and to your clarification, so just to be clear, essentially where the agency is at right now on this project is a determination that contamination didn't come from the mine, and if so, they've been hooked up to a supply, but there could potentially be contamination or higher levels of pollutants, and it's been determined that those are not from the mine. So it's not necessarily a guarantee that everybody's water is safe. Is that correct?
Thanks, Assemblyman Watts. Greg Lovato for the record. Yes, if you're talking about groundwater at the site and you're looking at the chemicals of concern, which include both arsenic and uranium, those chemicals are both found in mine impacted groundwater, as well as they could be, they've been identified as naturally occurring in the area, as well as enhanced or mobilized by agricultural activity, which changes the geochemistry in the shallow aquifer there. And so, to answer your question, I think it's a mixture of, wells that were previously impacted that have since been hooked up to city water, or wells that may have been impacted by sources from other than the mine site that have been connected to in-house treatment systems. So, it's kind of a mixture of circumstances out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Another quick clarification I wanted to get on the record. So, of course, when we entered into the deferral agreement, one of the reasons we did it was for speed, but also we believe that, we could see some savings. And I know that it's still early in the process, but I was just wondering, up to this point so far, how has the state's costs and cost share kind of tracked with the expectations going in, and how does that compare with what the state's costs would have been if we had not entered into the deferral agreement?
Thank you, Assemblyman Watts. So I would say that the notion of saving costs as a reason for entering into the deferral agreement gave us the potential. It's still to be seen exactly what that might have been. I think generally when projects are run by private entities. They tend to be, less costly than government projects overall, especially when they're very kind of unique and specific. I think the only thing I could offer at this point is, if we look back at the estimates of 30 to 50 million for the entire phase 1 of the project, and look at what the state cost share from that would have been, and then look at what, comes this year in terms of, what type of incentives and other things that can be offered to perform the work, at lower cost. I think we're going to find it's going to save money overall for the state. But I don't know if I have the answer to your question yet. One of the things that is an advantage, I guess, that would add efficiency to the project is rather than having federal contractors and contractors from the responsible party out there, you basically have one set, and that's just an overall efficiency advantage.
Thanks for that clarification. Again, I know that we're still somewhat early on in the process, so as things move forward, just appreciate continued updates with regards to how that is shaping up. And the final brief question I had is back to the stakeholder involvement and the community involvement and participation plan. It mentions the agreements with the tribes to provide technical assistance, and I was just wondering if you could, because I didn't see it broken out in the budget, I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the agency resources that are involved in providing that technical assistance for review and comment.
Thank you.
Very concise response to this, please.
Thank you, Chair Miller, Assemblywoman Potts. So those two contracts are initial amounts of $50,000, and those are contracts, interlocal agreements with each tribe, and then they can hire who they'd like to perform their technical oversight work. If they need more funds, we can revisit those contracts as needed.
Thank you so much, Director, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence.
Thank you. And actually, we would like to continue with some questions. Were you planning on a presentation for the next budget item about the environmental mitigation? Or can we begin asking questions? I already have a few members that have some questions on that.
So I have two more budget accounts that we had. One was our water financial assurance program, and the other was our industrial site cleanup program, 3189 and 3175. But I'm happy to answer questions if that's what the committee and the chair would prefer.
Okay, let's go ahead on this one and answer and just start with the questions, because I believe, again, we may get to what needs to be covered. So Vice Chair Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have questions about E258 and 259. In addition to the current environmental cleanup projects, what other sites in the state has your agency identified that may require action or emergency cleanup work in the upcoming biennium?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. This is Greg Lovato for the record. So to kind of put these contracts and this budget authority into context, we have identified specific cleanup projects, specific dry cleaner projects that do not have a viable responsible party, and we're seeking to take more action on, more cleanup action on with a state lead. And then we also maintain budget authority, and we've done this for quite some time at a specific level so that we're able to respond to events as needed around the state. So this could be anything from responses of hazardous materials, spills due to floods or earthquakes or accidents that may occur. And we're really talking here about not emergency response, which is really the province of fire departments and other emergency responders. We're talking about long-term events. And so the state for a long time has maintained the ability to respond to spills with this budget authority. one more thing to add to that. This also includes budget authority that would allow us to, it's a contract that allows us to respond to events at mine sites dealing with mine fluids events. So if a mine site were to be abandoned, we maintain an interim fluids management account that accesses the same contract to manage fluids in the event of a mine closure or unplanned mine closure.
Thank you for that. So we have a number of projects going on in the state. So when does the agency anticipate cleanup activities will be completed at the current EMAR project sites, or the timeline?
Thank you, Vice Chairman Moreno. I don't have those projections right now. Generally, these are sites that are long-term groundwater cleanups. They may take years to resolve, but I can provide that information in follow-up.
Please just make sure that that follow-up is sent to the committee so that we can share it amongst everyone, please.
Understood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my question.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We still have a few more budgets to cover. So could you maybe just give us like a 3 or 4 sentence synopsis of that budget, and then we'll just go directly into questions?
Certainly. So budget account 3189 supports our water financial assistance program that supplements projects throughout the state for improvement in water quality. The program has very good management, receives high marks from financial ratings agencies, including AAA from Standard & Poor's. We have summary maps and tables with current and cumulative projects funded by this program. So if committee members are interested, please let us know. And I'll pause there for questions on 3189 budget.
Okay. I believe it looks like Assemblywoman Peters has a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have to actually.
Yes, please.
Great. What issues prompted the agency to request authority for the provision of technical assistance to wastewater applying for infrastructure improvement loans?
This is Jennifer Carr for the record. Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters, for the question. We provide technical assistance to water and wastewater systems throughout Nevada, and we have for many years. This is an enhancement to those efforts and activities in order to fully cover the needs that are out there. We've also experienced an increase in contract costs over the last biennium, and so this ensures that we can be out there with our contractors providing the technical assistance that's asked of us to the best of our ability.
Staff may have some additional requests for data on that, just documenting what the difference is and how much is being requested and how much has historically been allocated. My second question is, what benefit does the agency expect to realize by providing technical assistance to wastewater systems?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters. Again, Jennifer Carr for the record. The technical assistance that's provided really varies across the state. We have very large wastewater systems in our large municipal areas, but we have incredibly small wastewater systems in our rural areas. And things like operator turnover, board training for the folks that run those municipal systems in the very small communities are all examples of training that's provided in order to support the very small systems throughout the state. Then there's essentially a wastewater plant in every small community, and so providing them with the technical, managerial, and financial assistance that they need to run those plants well is what we're there for.
Yeah, I understand that we're moving away from septic systems, particularly as we become a little bit more clustered in populations. So thank you for that response.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. We have questions from Chair Dennis. Chair Dennis.
I'm sorry. I think I was muted. Sorry. I pushed the wrong one. You can't even see me now. Okay, now you can see me. I took my video off. Can you talk about the additional technical assistance activities that you're anticipating providing to drinking water systems over the 21-23 biennium, including the benefits, anticipated benefits of the activities?
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Our program manager for the Office of Financial Assistance, Jason Cooper, will be answering that question.
Thank you, Greg. My name is Jason Cooper. I'm the Administrative Service Officer for the Office of Financial Assistance that oversees the state revolving funds. The additional work that we're requesting for in these work programs is going to help increase the amount of technical assistance that we're able to provide to some of the more rural communities that have demonstrated a need. That need has been communicated to our office as far as what kind of work that they need through outreach, through direct work, through the technical assistance providers. And some of that work includes manuals that include operations and maintenance manuals, cross-connection control plans. It could assist them in developing treatment plans, and it could also look at fiscal sustainability plans to help them with financial capacity. So there is a wide range of things that this program can support. And we are seeing a need out there through both the Bureau of Safe Drinking Water's requests, as well as the technical service providers in the need. And as Jennifer Carr had mentioned, the costs have gone up. So the enhancement was necessary. And we based the request off of the average cost that we have been experiencing over the last biennium.
So with all of the in trying to meet the cuts and things that the governor had asked, is that going to impact this particular aspect of it? Are you going to be able to provide those services when you have less employees?
Thank you, Senator Dennis. It's Jason Cooper again for the record. The funding source for technical assistance in drinking water is 100% federally funded. It's a set aside in the grant that we receive, and we're required to spend the funds for this purpose. We do not have any risk of losing those funds at this time, and we've already received another allocation for the next fiscal year's biennium. So we are in good place to be able to provide the funding that's necessary for this pieces. None of it is any general fund appropriations.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. With that, would you like to cover the next budget item?
Thank you, Chair Miller. Finally, I'll cover budget account 3175, supporting our Bureau of Industrial Site Cleanup. The budget is entirely funded by reimbursement agreements with companies or entities with responsibility for investigation and cleanup of hazardous substance releases from the Black Mountain Industrial Complex and nearby sites, including the former PepCon AMPAC facility. Real quickly here, E255 covers travel and training needed for staff to stay up to date with new and emerging cleanup regulations and techniques, as well as required health and safety requirements. E256 is needed to complete work associated with final cleanup decision phases, requires expertise to support reviews of final human health risk assessments and engineering feasibility studies. Some of these projects were delayed slightly due to the pandemic, and this will restore that funding in the coming biennium, although that's not the primary reason for the increase. It's primarily increased work. E257 will support Desert Research Institute, technical support for groundwater modeling needed to support final cleanup decisions for the Nevada Environmental Response Trust site, where groundwater releases have affected Las Vegas Wash and the Colorado River. And with that, I can take questions.
Great, thank you. Looks like the first question will be coming from Chair Dennis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine, I wanted to ask about the data collection. And so you've got in a 45,000 per year that you've increased the amount to do that work. How did you determine that was the amount that you needed?
Thank you, Senator Dennis. In looking here at the enhancement units for this decision, I'm not seeing the 45,000. I can look back at the budget itself. I don't know, Jeff, do you have?
On E257? That.
Oh, okay. So got it. E257 is basically this is we actually have. So thank you, Senator Dennis, Ghg Inventory for the record. So for E257, we have in-house groundwater modeling expertise that staff that actually perform some of this work. We have some contract assistants, but we found as we're getting towards deciding, you know, what's the optimal way to clean up this site? Do we, you know, do we dig it all up at the source? Do we enhance the pump and treat systems at different locations between the site and the Las Vegas Wash? And really this involves a comparative analysis using modeling. And we want to rely upon the expertise that Desert Research Institute has to help us make those decisions. And so that's one of the primary reasons for this increase. You know, our team does its best job to estimate what the additional need is, and that's what's reflected in this decision unit.
So, but I mean, as you already mentioned, you've been paying them 13,000, but you increased to 45. So have you increased the amount of work that you are going to have done? Is that why? And is it going to be done in a quicker manner?
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Yes, there will be an increased amount of work done in E257, yes, because we're going to be using the model to simulate different cleanup scenarios, and that will help make final decisions. So yes, that's an increase in work from what's currently been happening.
So does that include the NERC site and the NERC site in the Las Vegas Wash?
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Yes, that's correct.
And when do you anticipate those will be done?
So thank you, Senator Dennis, for the question. Ghg Inventory for the record. We have a projection of completing cleanup decisions for these sites in the next biennium. I don't think we have a projection on construction completion yet for those sites. It'll depend on, you know, what remedy is selected. But you know, I can revisit with our team and take a look again at our projections and provide you updated information if we have that.
And so what do you anticipate after, with all this information and the increased work, what do you think that, what's that going to lead to? What kind of efforts on your part?
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Ghg Inventory for the record. So as I mentioned previously, we're coming up on final remedy decisions for the Nevada Environmental Response Trust site related to perchlorate. You know, what's the final remedy look like for groundwater there? We've been doing cleanup action for a number of years with interim cleanup system, but what should the final cleanup look like? And we're trying to compare, you know, a number of different technologies, those that would occur, you know, right up at the wash, those that would occur back at the actual release site. And we're comparing both the technical feasibility, the cost effectiveness, and the timeliness of those different remedies. And modeling is part of how we analyze those aspects of those different options.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I believe our next questions are coming from Senator Brooks.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I just want to go back to item E256 and just want to know how $1 million per year in authority was determined to be the appropriate amount for the anticipated work in the upcoming biennium.
Thank you, Senator Brooks. So basically, this is all technical support to support final cleanup decisions at a number of the sites. The E257 is a part of that, the groundwater modeling. This also includes, all the cleanup decisions related to different cleanup technologies at sites across the complex, including the groundwater cleanup at the common areas. And so, we're supporting human health risk assessments and all the other technical evaluations that need to take place. We can provide more backup information on the level of effort associated with those. Generally, they're based on, the level of complexity at the site, as well as a past experience in completing work of this nature. And I don't know, Jeff Kinder, if you want to add anything to that.
Sure. Jeff Kinder, Deputy Administrator of NDEP for the record. As Greg mentioned during the Anaconda discussion, these cleanups are very dynamic, and we're entering a phase, as Greg said, where we're going to get a lot of the remedial investigation wrapped up. So we anticipate a large number of submittals coming in the next 2 years as part of this biennium. And this will support contracts for people to review those studies as we work our way towards proposing alternatives for final remedy of the site.
Thank you. And so do you have a timeline on when you think that all the remedies that have been identified and that you're contracting with will be completed?
Jeff Kinder for the record. I can provide that as a follow-up to this meeting. I don't remember the dates, but we do have a full schedule for all 3 operable units of when we'll reach proposal of alternative remedies, as well as the final record of decision where we'll implement the chosen remedy. But I'd be happy to provide that as a follow-up.
Thank you. I would appreciate that for the whole committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I don't believe I see any additional questions from members. Just want to make sure. Okay, with that, I really would like to express this to the entire department. Thank you so much for the preparation that you put into all of your presentations, and it was very thorough and very informative. And thank you so much for all the work you put into preparing for today. Thank you for that. With that, we actually have one last question. I believe, do we have a final question? Senator Dennis, do you have a final question?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we can close this agenda item and move to our final agenda item, which is actually public comment. So as previously mentioned, those interested in making public comment can do so by pre-registering online through the link provided on today's agenda. As BPS checks for callers and provides a few minutes to allow people to get into the queue, I just want to remind everyone that testimony is limited to 2 minutes or public comment is limited to 2 minutes per person, and that written remarks can be submitted for inclusion in the meeting records as well. So with that, I will wait on BPS. Let's wait a moment or so.
Chair, we do currently have one caller. Just let me know when you're ready for them.
Well, if we already have one, we are ready for them.
Perfect. Caller with the last 3 digits, 377. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record, and you will have 2 minutes and may begin. Chair, I'm going to try that one more time to see if it works.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Can you?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Excuse me. Esteemed Chairs Miller and Dennis and members of the subcommittees, my name is Jana Moan, JAINAMOAN, and I'm the External Affairs Director for the Nature Conservancy in Nevada. We are a global organization dedicated to conserving the lands and waters on which all life depends. Here in Nevada, we work to protect our state's lands and waters and to implement climate mitigation and adaptation tools using on-the-ground, nature-based, and science-based solutions. We are here today to offer a testimony in support of the budget request for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. DCNR provides a vital function and services for all Nevadans, including administering and monitoring the cleanup of environmental pollutants, managing our state parks, public lands and forests and water resources, protecting native species and cultural resources, promoting responsible outdoor recreation, and administering grants for conservation funding. Additionally, through the conservation districts, DCNR provides technical support for conservation projects that benefit all Nevadans. All of these programs serve critical needs for healthy and safe communities and for the environment. Regarding the proposed budget, we cannot understate the importance of the management analyst positions for the conservation bonds and conservation district programs. We understand the need to save costs, but are concerned about a further delay for hiring these positions, which are key to allocating conservation funding and administering conservation programs in rural Nevada. The grant funding approved by AB 84 during the last session is needed for conservation projects across the state, notably for wildfire restoration and prevention, which is something we can't wait 2 more years to address. At the same time, we applaud DCNR's leadership on climate issues. They serve an important role in our climate governance, which is what our state needs to meet mandated carbon reduction targets. We support the request for an additional position and capacity for the DCNR to administer and implement climate solutions in Nevada. The EPA state implementation tool is a good standard tool, but we need additional data to better monitor greenhouse gas emissions in Nevada, notably for the land sector. Our conservation staff at the Nature Conservancy appreciate the good working relationships we've developed with DCNR staff across multiple divisions.
Thank you. That is your 2 minutes. If you have any additional,
thank you.
Anything else you can submit if you have any additional comments. Thank you.
Hello, Chair. This is Michael from Broadcast. The public comment line is open and working, but we have no more callers at this time.
Okay, thank you. And with that, because we did have a few minutes for people to register and get on, and of course the additional minutes while another person was making public comment. With seeing no other callers, we will go ahead and close that budget item. This will conclude the meeting for today. Our next meeting for this subcommittee, again, will be on Thursday morning at 8 a.m. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.